The Reverend Dr. Fred Craddock was one of the greatest pastors that the Christian Church Disciples of Christ has ever produced. Dr. Craddock has written several books, taught at many Ivy League seminaries, and is well known all over the world as a definitive authority on the Gospel of Luke. It's a privilege to know the Reverend Dr. Fred Craddock. Fred once said to me, if I had to do it over again with all of my studies about Jesus, I would preach more about God. The book of James did just that. It talks about God. James, who introduces himself as the brother of Jesus of Nazareth, represents Christ, the Christos, as the highest and clearest example of who God is. The earliest Christian converts interpreted Christ's gospel using their formative religious concepts, and we still do it today. Are there any people in here who grew up Catholic? Any people who grew up Methodists? Any of you grow up Presbyterian? Amen. Anybody grow up Jewish? Amen. Yes. All kinds of faiths and traditions exist in this congregation. And all of us bring those early formative perspectives to this Christian church, Disciples of Christ. So James grew up like every good Jewish young man, being taught the law, being formed in the law. But as he followed his brother Jesus and became a Christian, he was aware of a new influence. A Platonic, a Hellenistic, a Greek perspective impacts this letter of James. For instance, in Greek philosophy, every being has its origin in the highest being. That being is referred to as the source, the life, the good, the truth, the idea, the light, the perfect. In the tradition of Plato, each being is arranged in a hierarchy as if on a ladder ascending to the perfect. And each receives energy from that highest being. That means that there's an imperfect you and I on earth, but for that, in the thought of Plato, there is a perfect us that exists somewhere in a heavenly sphere. If the being on earth is closer to the top, the being is more evolved. The being receives and radiates more light. The Little White Chapel Bible Study discovered this as we studied the Gospel according to Judas. James says, every good and perfect gift comes from above, given by the Father of lights. That is the Platonic perspective. But then James makes a very Hebraic turn in this still budding church, a contribution that is the foundation of our welcome table theology. James says that the author of light gives the gifts, but there is no shadow of turning with this divine gift. We hear that text as we sing, Great is Thy Faithfulness. James says there is no ladder, there is no pecking order in this new Christian universe. Some do not receive more light or more access to perfection than others. James proclaims every Christian is loved by God equally and receives the gift of salvation equally. Why might James be writing such a letter, trying to define Christianity from a Jewish and also a Greek perspective? Well, in the year 66 AD, or as we say now, Common Era, the Jews decided to revolt against their overlord Romans. The Romans responded 4 years later in the year 70 Common Era by destroying the Jewish temple. Now this was the second time the Jewish home of God had been destroyed. This great temple had stood and been worked on and been added to ever since the Jews had returned from Babylonian captivity over 500 years earlier. Christians sing a revival hymn called Marching to Zion. Any of you know that song? We're marching to Zion. The Jews called going to the temple after being exiled in Babylon, they called that returning to Zion. And now, 500 years later, the temple, Zion, the home of God, was again crushed. in panic, devout Jews and Jewish Christians fled, and as they fled, they had to find a new definition and adjust their existence to the prospect of more than just being run out of Israel, but also fleeing from their cultural and spiritual foundations, their cultural and spiritual center. Who are we now that our cultural home is gone, our spiritual base is destroyed? Would we still be Americans if the United States, God forbid, was invaded and we had to escape in cars or on foot looking for asylum in Canada or Cuba or Mexico or Europe? They bombed the Statue of Liberty. They destroyed Washington, D.C. They destroyed our church. How would we feel? As the citizens of Israel ran, looking backwards at the ruins, they had to have left wondering who God is, where is God who promised to never fail us, and can we connect with God now that we are no longer on ancestral holy ground? James was trying to rally and reassure the faithful in their dispersion, in the diaspora. James was writing to give people a sense of themselves and their relationship with God in all of their separation and all of their confusion and all of their fear. You and I have seen people come from other countries to America and bring with them their homeland traditions. And sometimes we may screw up our face and turn up our nose and go, why are they acting like that? Or why are they painting their house that awful shade of pink? Or why are they wearing a hijab on their head? This is America. If you are so happy to be here, then assimilate. Imitate us. But looking through the eyes of immigrants who are thankful to be alive and thankful that they may have escaped death and thankful that the United States has received them, if you look through their eyes, you will see that there is something within them that says to give up all of the old ways is to give up our sense of who we are descended from. What is important? During World War II, many Jews left their homeland to come to America and to go to other places. But because at that time the world was so unfriendly to Jews, many Jews went through the agony of giving up their hereditary surnames, went through the agony of not being able to freely practice their religion or teach their children their religion, giving up their essence to be safe. This is the way that the fleeing Jewish Christians felt in 70 A.D. James was saying, you are taking the presence of God with you. Because of Christ, a new relationship with God has moved out of the ruins of the temple straight into your heart, straight into your souls. God, as revealed through Jesus Christ, that God lives in you. Which one of us in here has not felt as if our temples have been destroyed and we have been cast abroad into the 21st century diaspora? Which ones of us in here have not wondered, who are you now, God? Where are you now? I have a doctor who is snazzy. If you think I wear decent shoes, you should see his. And I'm convinced I'm paying for them. His tie matches his shoes, they match his belt, and even his lab coat looks pressed and just out of the bag. And when I go in there, I go, my feet must be going up $20% just being in this young doctor's presence. He just finished medical school and he's just finished doing his residency. And he came in and he said, Pastor Thomas, your results came back and everything is fine, but I need to have a talk with you. And I thought, oh. He said, I want you to know that even though I have just started practicing medicine, I am considering leaving the practice of medicine. And I said, why, doctor? He said, because medicine has changed. I have gone all my life wanting to be a doctor since I was a little boy. I went through undergraduate school preparing for medical school. I went through my residency not getting any sleep because I wanted to be a doctor in the way of my parents. I wanted to be a doctor in the tradition of doctors. And now that I'm a doctor, I'm in this consortium that is no longer run by doctors. It is run by business people who have said that if I don't improve my portfolio, if I don't facilitate more patients, I can't get paid. They hold my salary, and it's based on the number of patients that I see, the number of patients in and out the door. He said, this is not the way I thought medicine was going to be. It's a temple destroyed. Magdalena Escobedo is an immigrant who has found work at Casa Alitas in Tucson. Some years ago, she came to the border with her children, and she was willing to be separated from them in order to gain entry into the United States. She was willing. What kind of mother are you? Someone asked her. And Escobedo replied, I love the country of my birth. I would have loved to have stayed there, but I had to flee it. I've had a gun to my head. I've had people threatening to compromise, and you know which word I'm changing, my daughter. My business was extorted, and they wanted to force my son to work for the cartels. That temple is gone. What would you do? You and I have the privilege sometimes of staying at home and reading a book or watching TV or playing computer games, but many of us are hiding because those places in our life that define us, our watering holes, our rallying stations, our soapboxes, our youth, all are no more. James says, as you find yourself out there, away from anything familiar, look inside for the word of truth that has come from the author of lights, from the Father of light, and has redesigned you and is traveling with you even in the midst of chaos, even in the midst of destruction, even in the midst of death. Labor Day came about because U.S. workers who came from all over the world were putting in 70-hour work weeks with no health care and no retirement benefits. So workers created the first Labor Day by calling a one-day worker strike. And they said, let's get together and reach past our differences, find out what common interests we have, and try to form some kind of group to advocate for the great good of all workers. Now, were women included in this? No. Were people of color included in this? No. I have a feeling that the Irish were suspicious of the Italians and vice versa. I suspected that nobody was trusting the Jews. But in the midst of all of that chaos and that turnaround, they were trying to put together something to work for each other. As you travel away from some things and toward others, it's going to be different. Life will never be the same. Signposts will change. But don't neglect the way you were formed, the way you first encountered God through Christ. No matter where you go, let that show in your prayer life, in your daily ethical behavior, and in the care of those around you, especially the less fortunate. The great apostles Peter and Paul agreed that faith is a gift freely given by grace. All we have to do is confess that Christ is Lord and God is with us. But in a small little book towards the back of the canon, James adds that as we continually move through the increasingly unfamiliar, the outworking of our faith is still laboring for the good of each other. God, no matter where I find myself, no matter where in the world I roam, no matter what I am called to leave behind, may the work that I've done speak for me. May the life that I have lived speak for me. May the service that I give speak for me. Thank you so much for your son. And it's in his name I pray.